Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurum Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Darati Swapadantikam. Vandeyam Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavansha Shri Rupam Sagajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Paridana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamsha. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Rubhyascha Krupa Sindhu Bhevata Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shri Vasari Gauda Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So welcome to our continued study of this Bhagavad Gita, and we have now reached the 18th chapter. Title is Conclusion, the Perfection of Renunciation. So chapter 18, it is a summary of the entire Bhagavad Gita. Just as chapter 2 was a summary, after setting the scene in chapter 1, Krishna gave an overview of what he was going to speak, and then chapters 3 through 17 he provided all the content, and in chapter 18 he'll now summarize and then give his most potent conclusive instructions, followed by Arjuna's response and reaction in this beautiful chapter, in chapter 18. So, and as in all chapters and in all sections of the Bhagavad Gita, the ultimate conclusion is render devotional service. To become Krishna's devotee. That is the perfection of life. And so the first 6 chapters spoke about karma yoga, how to do action in a detached manner. And he elevated from karma yoga to jnana yoga. Ultimately, at the end of 6 chapters, said, the highest of all yogis is the bhakta. Right? Yogi nam api sarvesham madhgate nantaratma shraddhavan bhajate yomam sami yuktadamo mataha. The highest of all is the bhakta. And that led to then in this chapter 7 through 12, Krishna spoke about pure devotional service. And so many glories of devotional service were explained in those middle 6 chapters. And in the final section, Krishna is giving gyan, knowledge, about knowledge and renunciation and the activities and modes of material nature, with the goal of helping everybody transcend the modes and come to devotional service. So this is the structure. And so now Krishna in the 18th chapter will provide a summary of everything he has spoken. All the new material has been concluded, as Prabhupada opens a purport saying, actually, the Bhagavad Gita is finished in 17 chapters. The 18th chapter is a supplementary summarization of the topics discussed before. So we'll enjoy a nice summary here. So Arjuna, like many chapters, quite appropriate, opens the final chapter with a question. Arjuna said, O mighty armed one, I wish to understand the purpose of renunciation, tyaga, and of the renounced order of life, sannyas, O killer of the Keshi demon, master of the senses. So here Arjuna asks the question. 2 very important concepts in the Bhagavad Gita are presented: renunciation of the fruits, tyaga, and the renounced order of life, sannyas. One in the varnashram, the ashram of sannyas, and the other in detached action. So he wants to understand, are these similar or are these different? Should we work in a detached manner or should we give up work entirely? Very similar to the question that opened chapter 5. And Srila Baladev Yudhabhushan comments that, in the 13th verse of chapter 5 and the 20th verse of chapter 4, we see the words sannyas and tyaga used respectively. And Arjuna is wondering, are these the same or are these different or unrelated in their definition? So Krishna will answer in the coming verses. Now, Prabhupada in our Acharya's comment that two important references to Krishna, he's called Rishikesha, as we've seen previously earlier in the Bhagavad Gita. And so Arjuna is asking Krishna that you are the master of my senses. Please take control of my senses, particularly my mind, and help me find peace and serenity. And this is the ultimate peace that we find is when we bring our senses to Krishna. He is Rishikesha. He is the master of our senses. And he refers to him as Keshi Nishudana. You are the killer of the Keshi demon. So please destroy the demon of my doubts. Doubts are very difficult for us because they inhibit us from moving forward unencumbered by those doubts. So Krishna is being asked by Arjuna to kill the demons of his doubts. So Krishna now responds in the second verse. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, the giving up of activities that are based on material desires is what learned men call the renounced order of life, sannyas. And giving up the results of all activities is what the wise call renunciation, tyaga. So here first Krishna is giving the opinion of others before he gives his own. And the others suggest that sannyas and tyaga are different. Going to the forest or doing one's duty detached, those are two different things according to some learned sages. And the sannyas portion here is referring to the path of jnana yoga. As they give up all material activities, so there's full detachment from material activities, but we know not yet attached to Krishna's activities. And specifically one is detaching from all the karma kanda activities, so detached from all desire for material fruits. And the renunciation of fruits, we know, is the Nishkam Karma Yoga path. So two paths, Jnana Yoga, Nishkam Karma Yoga. As some are suggesting that these are different paths. And we know that we need to give up activities for the purpose of gaining something for our desires, right? But we do activities for the purpose of purifying. So we know we don't want to remain attached, but the goal is to perform activities for the purpose of purification. That is the key. Not to give up activities themselves, but set the right objective in our actions. So the key question that's kind of going to be answered here is what to give up. Should we give up activity or the fruits? That is what Krishna is going to answer here in a couple of verses. So in verse 3, Krishna is giving some other ideas. Some learned men declare that all kinds of fruitive activities should be given up as faulty, yet other sages maintain that acts of sacrifice, charity, and penance should never be abandoned. So according to Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur, he says the first part of this verse is referring to the Sankhya yogis, who say that all material activities should be given up, even karma kanda, but especially violence to animals, as prescribed in the Vedas. And Srila Prabhupada talks about that primarily in the purport, that the misuse of those different shastric injunctions against the animals should be abandoned due to the inability to perform those properly. The second part of the verse refers to the karma mimamsas, who say activities are part of the Vedas, and one cannot give them up. One should just do their activity, and then the results will come, and then you are the rightful owner of those results. So that is what the opinions of others are. And so who is right? Now we'll see in the fourth verse, as Krishna says, O best of the Bharatas, now hear my judgment about renunciation. O tiger among men, renunciation is declared in the scriptures to be of three kinds. So ultimately we know Krishna is the absolute truth. His opinion is ultimately the only thing that matters. He is the author of the Vedas. So we should understand what he thinks. Others are taking Krishna's scriptures and trying to interpret what the meaning is. So who's going to have a more clear understanding of the meaning? The author or someone else who's reading the author's book? Of course, the author. And so Krishna is the absolute truth. And sometimes we see, well, I read in this part, this person's saying this person's saying that. It's all fine and good. Even Krishna here is presenting different opinions. But ultimately, we must remember, Krishna is the absolute truth. He is the source of all knowledge. He is the source of everything. Right? So because of that, as Anadir Govinda, he is the ultimate judgment truth. And so his opinion is all that matters. So he's going to speak about three types of tyaga coming up in verses 7 through 12. But before that, he's going to directly now answer Arjuna's question coming up in the 5th and 6th verse. So 5th, acts of sacrifice, charity, and penance are not to be given up. They must be performed. Indeed, sacrifice, charity, and penance purify even the great souls. So, why must Arjuna perform these activities? To purify. Krishna says even the great souls are purified by these activities. So the key is to continue doing activity that is purifying. Don't do activities that are contaminating ourselves, but purifying activities must be done. And these three activities, sacrifice, charity, and penance. When one does one intelligently, as Krishna will explain in the next verse, then one obtains the benefit of purification from all the material contaminations that are residing in the heart. And thus one can elevate. And so by renouncing these, we lose the opportunity to purify. That is Krishna's conclusive judgment. Srila Prabhupada gives the example in the purport of the marriage ceremony. He says the marriage ceremony is one of the important sacrifices, and it should not be given up if one is not yet fully purified. Because if they're not purified, one will partake in so many sensual desires that are contaminating. But if one takes to the sacrifice of marriage, in which one is confined to the confines of marriage, then one can purify from those desires and thus elevate. So as that example, one should perform these different activities for the purpose of purifying. So the conclusion now Krishna will give in the 6th verse, which says, all these activities should be performed without attachment or any expectation of a result. They should be performed as a matter of duty, O son of Pratap. That is my final opinion. So the key, now Krishna says in the 5th verse, we must do them. But the key of how to do them is given here. We must do them detached from the fruits. And we saw this presented in great detail in chapters 3 and 5. 2 full chapters dedicated to detachment from the results, because we're not so easily detached from the results. So it's not about doing the duties or renouncing them. It is about how to do them. They should be performed without attachment to the results, as Krishna says, and as a matter of duty. So the activity itself doesn't create the binding reactions. It's our consciousness of who is the doer that ultimately determines that. And Krishna is going to explain in the coming up section about who is the doer by talking about the constituents of action. So renunciation, again, is an internal state of consciousness. Externally, the activities may be performed, but internally, are we attached to the fruit or not? And so, what is the result of doing the activity and renouncing the fruit, again, is it leads to purification. Even great souls can get purified. But if I think I'm the doer, I'm the enjoyer, then we'll receive the binding reactions and thus remain fixed within the material world, within the 3 modes of material nature. So a real sannyasi can actually do work in a renounced way. The sannyasi is not necessarily inactive. They may perform all kinds of activities, but activities for the pleasure of Krishna. And thus, we'll see, as we'll talk about in a little bit, there is inaction in action, as we saw in the 4th chapter. So there's two levels of renunciation. We can renounce the fruits, this is in Nishkam Karma Yoga, or we can renounce the activity, that is in Jnana Yoga. So Krishna says, first, give up the fruits. That is better than going directly to sannyas. Because if you give up activities, we lose the means by which we can purify. So if I give up all my activities with still an impure heart, I will lament and hanker for those material desires, and ultimately I'll fall back down. So instead, take to the purifying activity, but renounce the fruits, and thus one can elevate. Then one later on, in a purified state, can take to the sannyas condition of renouncing activities. But of course, we'll see that ultimately the devotee of the Lord never renounces any activity that can be done for the pleasure of Krishna. So a Vaishnava sannyasi will perform all activities that can be used to please Krishna. And so that is the key. So one should do the duty in the mode of obligation according to our varna. Based on our varna, whatever activities is prescribed to us, one should do as a matter of duty, and one can purify and thus elevate to the next level of renunciation. Right? And the final comment I'll make on this verse is Prabhupada establishes the highest criterion of religion. He says that any activity which leads to devotional service to the Lord should be accepted. So this is the ultimate criteria for what we should decide to do and not to do. If it leads to devotional service, which means pleasing Krishna, it should be done. Simple, clear, and black and white criteria for any religious activities. Do it if it pleases Krishna. And that's a very powerful statement that we should embed in our consciousness and make all the different options very clear in our heart. Okay? Now, Krishna is going to explain the renunciation in the various modes of nature. 7. Prescribed duties should never be renounced. If one gives up his prescribed duties because of illusion, such renunciation is said to be in the mode of ignorance. So in the mode of ignorance, we cannot give up the purifying activities because we don't know what the value is. We don't understand the why. That is ignorance. That is illusion. Right? So when we do such renunciation, it results in more ignorance. The modes of ignorance become more prominent. Right? So we see here, starting in verse 7, and through verse 7 through 12, Krishna is going to use the words sannyas and tyaga interchangeably. And he is indicating here again that these are the same. He's telling Arjuna, there's no difference. They are actually, the real tyaga is the same as sannyas. Real renunciation of fruits is non-different from the renounced order of life. So, yes, they are on two different levels. One is internal, one is external, but they are the same. And as we mentioned in the last verse, once one fully purifies, one can then think about the possibility of renouncing activities. So, one may ask, why is Krishna speaking about both Karma Yoga and Jnana Yoga? Because again, this Karma Yoga is a purifying activity to then take to the higher rungs of the yoga ladder. Again, all of this, ultimately, Krishna will say, abandon everything and just go to bhakti. And that is why Srila Prabhupada in his purports, we note, he is speaking about devotional service. The verse itself is referring to Karma Yoga, as Srila Prabhupada did in chapters 3 and 5 in the purports. He is bringing us to Krishna's ultimate conclusion, which is to do which is satisfying to Krishna, and that is Bhakti Yoga. So we may wonder why we're speaking about modes of goodness and still talking about devotional service. We know devotional service transcends the modes. That is because Prabhupada, by his great mercy, is taking us to the ultimate conclusion that Krishna will give us, which is abandon everything and surrender unto him. Right? So just some examples of improper renunciation in the mode of ignorance. I'm not going to use an airplane because it's material, where an airplane can be used to transport one to many, many different places in the world to spread Krishna's message. Well, that is improper renunciation, as we see in Nectar Devotion. That's Falgu Vairagya. That's false renunciation. Anything that can be used in the service of Krishna should be used. This marriage ceremony Prabhupada talks about. Again, performing a marriage ceremony by a sannyas, if that can help one avoid sinful life by living in a regulated manner, then one should do it. So that activity, again, is a service to Krishna. So giving up these sorts of activities when they can be beneficial for one's own purification or for devotional service, that is in renunciation, in the mode of ignorance. Now in 8, anyone who gives up prescribed duties as troublesome or out of fear of bodily discomfort is said to have been renounced in the mode of passion. Such activity never leads to elevation or renunciation. So in the mode of passion, one thinks, why should I do the duty? I should just give them up. They're too much trouble, too bothersome, too much effort, and that's in the mode of in the passion. This is the consciousness when one renounces in the mode of passion. Quitting your job because you don't like it. That means, I'm renouncing. That is renunciation in a mode of passion. Instead, we should use the results of one's jobs for the service of Krishna, and willing to endure maybe the difficulties or distresses of that activity for the pleasure of Krishna. So renouncing something because of one's own desire, thinking it to be too troublesome or fear of discomfort, that is in the mode of passion. Because again, nothing should be given up that they can be used in the service of Krishna. Now in the mode of goodness, Krishna will speak in verse 9. O Arjuna, one who performs his prescribed duty only because it ought to be done and renounces all material association in all attachments to the fruit, his renunciation is said to be in the mode of goodness. So renunciation in the mode of goodness, just do your duty. Tolerate any difficulties, discomfort, renounce the fruits. And why is one in this never frustrated, always satisfied? Because one is not trying to acquire the fruits. They're just trying to please the Supreme Lord. And so if results come from one's activities, great. If they don't come, no problem. One remains equipoise. And we've seen this characteristic throughout the Bhagavad Gita. And so Srila Prabhupada writes very nicely in the purport, and sometimes we wonder, based on our ashram, am I rendering service to Krishna? Or we use this term, I have my material and spiritual activities. No. In the right consciousness, everything is spiritual. And Prabhupada says, a man working in the factory does not associate himself with the work of the factory, nor with the workers of the factory. He simply works for Krishna. So, one who is in the job, in the office place, is not engaged in the material activity. He's not associating with that job or with that with the personalities. He's simply understanding he is in the process of rendering service to Krishna. How? By using the fruits of that work for the pleasure of the Lord. We'll see a little bit more about that in a coming verse. So, what are the symptoms now of one who renounces in the mode of goodness? Krishna now starts to give the symptoms of this person in verse 10. The intelligent renouncer, situated in the mode of goodness, neither hateful of inauspicious work nor attached to auspicious work, has no doubts about work. So the symptoms here of one in the mode of goodness, there is no hatred or attachment. They're again equipoised, and there are no doubts. They're fully convinced. Yes, I am on the right path. This is the right thing to do. Right? So even if something is uncomfortable, maybe the job is not so pleasant, one is willing to do it, seeing as a necessary duty, an opportunity to purify and ultimately to please Krishna. So one is not also fearful about the reactions, thinking, I'm doing this work and I might get some reactions. The Jnani yogis who renounce, they're fearful of the material reactions. But the intelligent renouncer in the mode of goodness understands that by relinquishing the results, one doesn't obtain the reactions. And Krishna will explain this here in a couple of verses. So how we react or respond to the unfavorable conditions is very important. One doesn't despise or hate the work. Working in a dirty, hot place is okay. Maybe it's a little bit stressful environment. Maybe the people are not so nice. One is again willing to endure those difficulties for the blissful satisfaction of the Supreme Lord. And so when we see this, when we see our work activities also as an opportunity to serve Krishna. Then, what interestingly we've experienced is that 7 days a week we are happy. Monday through Friday we typically, I have to work. Saturday and Sunday, few days to try to enjoy the body. This is in the bodily consciousness. But if one is engaged in pleasing Krishna, the work Monday through Friday is also pleasing to Krishna, and devotional service, maybe on Saturday coming to these classes or rendering some book distribution, other service, Saturday going to temple, it all becomes devotional service. And thus one remains equipoised 7 days a week working for the pleasure of the Supreme Lord. Final comment I'll make here is that no doubts about work. Having no doubts is very key. This is the important ingredient to remain determined, because otherwise, if we have doubt, it holds back our determination. We become bewildered, and so without doubts, we can work with great enthusiasm and purify very quickly, and thus make great effort and not be half-hearted in our attempts. Okay. So now, why can't we give up all activities? Krishna is going to answer. It is indeed impossible for an embodied being to give up all activities, but he who renounces the fruit of actions is called one who is truly renounced. So again, sannyas or tyaga. But why one can't give up activities? Because we know the soul is active. It needs some engagement. And so Krishna again is suggesting do good work by being detached. It is beneficial. We see so much emphasis on this. So who is the real sannyasi or renouncer? One who works only for Krishna, renouncing the fruits to him. Right? Prabhupada writes in the purport, there are members of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness who work very hard in their office or in the factory or some other place, and whatever they earn, they give to the society. Such highly elevated souls are actually sannyasis and are situated in a renounced order of life. Very important for grahastas who are working. Sometimes we lament, I cannot serve my guru full time, I cannot serve Krishna full time. Here Prabhupada gives the clear, who is the real sannyasi? One who works and gives all the fruits to Krishna. That is a real sannyasi. Mayavadis claim that they are elevated because they give up all activities. And they think nobody else is renounced. But actually, we know it is harder to have fruits and to give them up. That is a deeper renunciation. If you have no fruits, it's pretty easy to give them up. There's nothing to give up. But the sannyasi who works in the job place and still renounces their fruits, that is the true renunciate. And Krishna is making that very clear here in 11th verse. And Srila Prabhupada gives very strong comfort to those who are engaged in the Grihastha ashram and are working full time, that it is also service to Krishna. And so one should be very confident and fixed that they are rendering devotional service and not lamenting or developing some distaste or hatred for their work. And so, because again, the highest renunciation, to have fruits, but to be able to give them up. The important point is renunciation can occur in any situation, regardless of what varna we may be in, regardless of our ashram. Renunciation is required for all of us in all ashrams, in all varnas, and it is possible, and there is no better or lesser. All of it is an opportunity to please Krishna and to purify the heart of all the material contaminations so that one can come to the platform of pure devotional service. So now Krishna is going to compare what happens when one is detached versus what happens when one is attached. So what are the different options so that we can then decide which is best for us. Verse 12. For one who is not renounced, the threefold fruits of action, desirable, undesirable, and mixed, accrue after death. But those who are in the renounced order of life have no such result to suffer or enjoy. So here it is. We attach, bondage. More birth, death, old age, and disease. Adhyatmik, adhibhautik, adhidevik. The threefold miseries will be forced upon us based on the reactions from desirable, undesirable, and mixed activities. We'll have all kinds of reactions. But one who is detached is liberated, free from all reactions. Right? And so here again, Krishna is using sannyasa and tyaga interchangeably. Again, indicating that they are the same. But Krishna is saying the best here is renounce the fruits of work that is superior to renouncing work itself, because again, it purifies, and that work has the opportunity for us to please Krishna. So real renunciation, again, doesn't use the fruits for themselves. If you go to work, the paycheck is going to come. It doesn't mean that we renounce the paycheck and throw it in the garbage. No, it means to use it for the pleasure of Krishna. And so one of the measures of our renunciation is not how much am I giving to Krishna. You think, what? Really? It is not how much I'm giving to Krishna. It's how much I'm keeping for myself. Of the means I have, how much am I keeping for myself, and how much is I giving to Krishna? That is the measure. Because one may have small means, but of that small means, they're giving something that means more than somebody who has great wealth and gives a small fraction. Somebody may give $1,000 and think that is very pleasing, but if they are a billionaire, that is very insignificant. They're keeping much more for themselves. Whereas someone with limited means is giving just $1 can be extremely pleasing to Krishna because of his means. And Kolavesha Sridhar is our great example of the beautiful pastime of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. About with his meager means, he was still giving half of his income and living in a very simple way. And so Krishna looks at not necessarily how much we give, but more how much are we keeping for ourselves. So we should keep for ourselves what is necessary to live a simple life of high thinking and use the rest of our means in the service of Krishna. Of course, even maintaining the body is a service to Krishna because that body is being used to render different activities for the Supreme Lord. So now Krishna is going to speak on this Jnana Yoga, about actions and remaining free from the reactions based on having some knowledge. So 13, Krishna says, O my Arjuna, according to the Vedanta, there are 5 causes for the accomplishment of all action. Now learn these from me. So these next 6 verses are going to summarize the last 5 chapters that we've discussed. The first part of this chapter, 18, we discussed Karma Yoga, detached action. And now we're going to see detached work and the role of the Supersoul, the knowledge of Supersoul that we got from chapter 13 particularly, and the role in all activities. So how to work and remain free from the reactions. The major question or confusion is going to now be answered is how does a devotee do work but not have to suffer the results? Why is that the case? We know detached action leads to it, but why does that actually happen? Krishna is now going to explain, and he'll explain this through the 5 causes of action that Krishna is going to discuss, and it'll help us see that we are not the doer. That is the key of this coming up section. Understanding we are not the independent doer. We are the limited doer. And thus, the detachment is our actual constitutional position. We don't want to detach because we wrongly think we are the doer. So Krishna is going to break that understanding by explaining the 5 causes of action, and thus it'll become very clear that because I am not the independent doer, then I am not the independent enjoyer of the fruits. It's a simple logic that Krishna will explain, and it'll make it much easier for us to pursue detached action. And knowing this, we can become free from the bondage of these activities, and thus obtain the purifying activities from work, but avoid the bondage that results from attached work. So this is what Krishna is now going to say, and how to become reactionless in all of our activities. 14. The place of action, the body, the performer, the various senses, the many different kinds of endeavor, and ultimately the supersoul. These are all 5 factors of action. So there are 5 aspects that combine to action. The body, the kshetra, the field of activities. The performer, the jiva, the living entity. the various senses. They acquire information and are used to perform various work. They're the instruments of work. The endeavors themselves to perform any work. And finally, the supersoul, which is the controller of all. This is the most important of the five, as we'll see. And when we know these five causes, we understand, wait a minute, there is the supersoul that is sitting beyond what I can initially observe. And that is the sanctioner of all my activities. And thus, I am not the independent doer. There's someone beyond me who is allowing me to do even the smallest of action of raising my hand. That in itself is not something I can do on my own. It requires the sanction of the supersoul. So the hardest part of renouncing the fruits is thinking I am the doer, and Krishna here is suggesting ultimately the supersoul, he says in the verse. Then we can understand, yes, I am not the self-made man. I am not all my work, my intelligence, my effort has led to my wealth. My. We now understand, we'll understand that it is a supersoul that is enabling us to do so many activities. As we saw in the 15th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, where it is Matashmatir Jnana Mahopanancha. Krishna is a source of remembrance, forgetfulness, and knowledge. So what is our role in activity? What is the role of the supersoul? That is very important for us to understand. If the supersoul is ultimately doing, then am I just a robot? Do I have no free will? Then why am I responsible for my activities? I'm being forced to do this work. I'm forced to be a sinner by the supersoul. Is that the right way? So Prabhupada explains in the purport, we understand that no. All action originates with our desires. So we express our limited independence through our free will, our eternal free will. It is never taken away from us. And we have desires. And those desires then are sanctioned by the supersoul, by Krishna, based on our qualification and our desires. So the activities arise, they begin by our own free will, but the endeavor to perform those activities is not independent. Krishna must sanction them. My ability to move my hand like this must be sanctioned by Krishna. I can express the desire to move my hand, but Krishna must sanction it based on my qualification to have the right to move my hand. And thus, I am not the independent doer. So, actually, we see that the supersoul is also the source of inspiration to do any work. He knows our desires, and thus actually gives us the inspiration to do activities. So even the impetus for work, for action, it comes from Krishna. But we are responsible because it all originates from our desires. And thus the laws of karma apply. Because if I was forced to do actions by someone else's jurisdiction, then I should not be responsible for the results. But because I am expressing my desires, which begins the actions, I am ultimately responsible for those results. So very important concept that Krishna has already explained earlier in Bhagavad Gita and is reinforcing here so that we understand our dependence on the supersoul for all of our activities, and thus we can more easily detach from the activities. Otherwise, there's no point. We're saying Krishna is forcing me, and this is an incorrect conclusion that some will make. And in the purport, we see that the nature gives us these different types of bodies based on our past actions and desires. As Srila Prabhupada always says, if we want to be naked, Krishna will give us a body of a tree where we can stand naked for thousands of years. If we want to eat indiscriminately, whatever we want, then Krishna will give us the body of a hog who eats everything, including stool and garbage. So nature, under the jurisdiction of Krishna, responds to our desires and gives us so many different bodies. And these bodies give us a limited ability to enjoy. Like if I'm a dog, I cannot enjoy an iPhone like that. So now we'll move on to verse 15. Whatever right or wrong action a man performs by body, mind, or speech is caused by these five factors. So all work, again, is done by these 5 factors, and activity is performed by body, mind, and speech. We talked about the austerity of body, mind, and speech, and that is why. Because the activities are performed by these 3 areas, and that's why the 3 Dandi sannyasis, or Vaishnava sannyasis, they vow to serve Krishna. Why 3 Dandi? Because they're serving Krishna by body, mind, and speech. The Ekadandi sannyasis take a vow to try to become one with Krishna, but our 3 Dandi Vaishnava sannyasis, they're serving Krishna with body, mind, and speech. So what is right or wrong? Prabhupada writes, the words right or wrong are significant in this verse. Significant because right or wrong is not based on cultural norms or governmental laws. It is based on the laws of Krishna, the laws of Shastra. That is what determines what is right or wrong, not our own whimsical ideas. 16. Therefore, one who thinks himself the only doer, not considering the 5 factors, is certainly not very intelligent and cannot see things as they are. So who is foolish? One who doesn't see the 5 areas of action, the 5 causes of action, and thinks himself the independent doer. We often can see the first 4 causes of the action. We can see the body, the senses, maybe have some idea of the soul or some inspiration internally. We know our endeavor. So we can see those 4. But what we miss without proper gyan, knowledge, is the role of the supersoul in all action. Missing the supersoul as the supreme efficient cause leads one to think, I am the independent doer, and thus attachment to the fruit. So one who doesn't see these 5, and particularly the 5th cause of action, is foolish, according to Krishna. And what is the result of foolishness? Bondage, because we attach to the results, and thus enjoy unlimited misery and suffering. I use the word enjoy in jest, of course, because there's no enjoyment through the attachment of the fruits of our work. Now in 17, one who is not motivated by false ego, whose intelligence is not entangled, though he kills men in this world, does not kill, nor is he bound by his actions. So here, Krishna is speaking directly to Arjuna's situation. When we act knowing we are not the doer and renounce the result, then there is inaction in action. We can do activities, but no reactions are accrued to us. And Krishna says, talks about killing, because of course Arjuna was hesitant to kill. And he's telling him, there's no reaction because you're working under my direction. You're working for me, and thus there's no reaction. And Prabhupada writes in the purport that Arjuna's desire not to fight is due to false ego. He thought himself the doer, and thus didn't want to work. He didn't want to fight because that was his desire. So it's very important that when we work according to our own desires, that is due to false ego. Thinking again, I am this body, I am this doer, forgetting the supersoul's role in all activities. And so Arjuna not seeing the supersoul sanction of that fighting by not wanting to fight, Prabhupada guides us, is that is the presence of false ego. And he writes in the purport, personal activity and responsibility arise from false ego and godlessness. So this is why Krishna ultimately tells Arjuna to surrender everything unto him. And we should perform our activities fully surrendered to Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, and thus one will achieve perfection. So we're not responsible when we see these 5 actions. And Prabhupada gives the very wonderful example of the soldier. The soldier can perform the activity of killing, but if that killing is done under the guidance and jurisdiction of government, who has engaged that soldier in such occupation, there is no results. But if that same soldier, with the same training, goes out and kills under his own desire, due to some conflict or other issue, then that same government will give him jail. So the activity is the same, the killing, but the consciousness, the why. One is under guidance, no reactions. Under on one's own desires, reactions. So it's a very nice example of how we can create inaction in action. 18. Knowledge, the object of knowledge, and the knower are the three factors that motivate action. The senses, the work, and the doer are the three constituents of action. So here we see parts of chapter 13 again. The jnana, knowledge about soul and supersoul. Gyeya, the object of knowledge. Again, who is the object of knowledge? The soul and supersoul. And of course, the knower, both the soul and supersoul. So these three things, before any work is done, there must be some impetus, some catalyst to do work. And that is done by the knowledge, the object of knowledge, and the knower. And ultimately, the supersoul is our supreme motivator. Knowing our desires inspires us to do action. And once there's an impetus to do work, then the next three come into play: the senses, the work, and the doer. So this is the kind of sequence of the three. So without knowledge, our inspiration to work is in an attached way. And with knowledge, we're inspired to work in a detached way. So this knowledge becomes very, very important in determining what type of work we can do. So the inspiration plus the worker leads to different action. And it all starts with some sort of inspiration. So the next 21 or 22 verses now are going to speak about the effects of the modes of material nature, as we saw from chapters 14 and 17. So we're going to see all kinds of different activities based on the different types of modes of nature, again, as a review to what was discussed in chapters 14 and 17. So verse 19. According to the three different modes of material nature, there are three kinds of knowledge, action, and performer of action. Now hear of them from me. So now Krishna is taking, again, these three impetuses for action: knowledge, the action, and the performer of action. And is going to describe those in the three modes of material nature. Not necessarily the three impetuses, but these specific three constituents. So the knowledge, the action, and performer, and how all of these break out into the different modes. So that is what Krishna will be now discussing here in the coming up verses. And what we remember or know is that based on our knowledge, we perform certain activities. If I know the benefits of my detached work, I'll perform it. But if I don't know, I won't. And so we'll see how knowledge becomes a key contributor to the types of work that we do. And so ultimately in this, knowledge kind of summarizes that motivator for action. The action and performer are the constituents from the prior verse. They refer to the final three. So this is verse 19 is connected to verse 18. Okay. 20. That knowledge by which one undivided spiritual nature is seen in all living entities, though they are divided into innumerable forms, you should understand to be in the mode of goodness. So, knowledge in the mode of goodness, what is it? One who sees the spirit soul in everyone. Undivided, very important. So this knowledge will lead to certain types of activities. Activities appreciating the soul in everybody. Peaceful activities. Non-violent. Generally activities in the mode of goodness. That knowledge by which one sees in every different body there is a different type of living entity, you should understand to be in the mode of passion. So if my knowledge brings me to think that everyone is just a body, there is no soul, everyone is different, there's not a commonality of the part and parcel living entity within all, that means I am in the mode of passion. And what happens in the mode of passion, I'm not worried about next life. I'm just thinking about the body and how to enjoy it. Work hard to satisfy the senses and enjoy this body to the full. So it's a temporary result, and that is fully in the mode of passion. And Prabhupada writes in the next purport referring to this mode of passion, he says that knowledge producing many theories and doctrines by dint of mundane logic and mental speculation is the product of the mode of passion. So this is what we see in the mode of passion. And 22, and that knowledge by which one is attached to one kind of work as the all in all, without knowledge of the truth, and which is very meager, is said to be in the mode of darkness. So in the mode of ignorance, one is attached to a single kind of work and as everything, and is very meager in its activities. Eating, sleeping, mating, defending, that's all there is to know. Only acquire knowledge to how to enjoy the body and keep it comfortable. This is knowledge in the mode of ignorance. So both passion and ignorance, the knowledge is based on the bodily platform, identification with the body. Only in the mode of goodness is there knowledge about the spirit soul. So this knowledge, again, it serves as the impetus to action. Based on what we know, we'll perform different activities. So going back to verse 18 now, just for a quick connectivity, Krishna said knowledge, the object of knowledge, and the knower are the three factors that motivate action. So this knowledge, again, serves as the impetus for the action, and then the senses, the work, and the doer perform the activities. So having now explained how the impetus sit in the three different modes, Krishna is now going to discuss how the action, the activities, and the worker, the performer of the action, are situated in the three modes, and that provides a conclusive or holistic understanding of action in the three modes. Okay? So, I know it's a lot to connect, but you can see Krishna's very systematic connection of these points to help us get to the conclusion, detached work, and ultimately devotional service. So 23, that action which is regulated, which is performed without attachment, without love or hatred, without desire for fruit or results, is said to be in the mode of goodness. So now, when I have knowledge in the mode of goodness, the action is as such. It is also in the mode of goodness. And what is action in the mode of goodness? I do it for the sake of duty. No love or no hatred. Just do out of sense of duty. Okay? 24. But action performed with great effort by seeking one to gratify his desires, enacted from a sense of false ego, and is called action in the mode of passion. So if I'm only seeing the body, no idea of the soul, then my action will also have a similar or connected result, which is only focused on gratifying the sense desires. There is no focus on the soul. I only know the body, and thus my actions also follow. So again, the knowledge connects to action. 25. That action performed in illusion, in disregard of scriptural injunctions, and without concern for future bondage or violence or distress caused to others, is said to be in the mode of ignorance. So action in the mode of ignorance is complete disregard for Shastra, complete illusion, ignorance. Don't care about future bondage, even willing to commit great violence and injure others. Do what we want. So again, both passion and ignorance, the actions are performed on the bodily platform because the knowledge is of the bodily platform. Right? So again, connecting all of this together. So now we've discussed knowledge in the modes, we've discussed action in the modes, and now we'll discuss the worker, the person, the performer of action in the modes. 26. One who performs his duty without association with the modes of material nature, without false ego, with great determination and enthusiasm, and without wavering in success or failure, is said to be a worker in the mode of goodness. So a worker in the mode of goodness is going to follow his knowledge of the mode of goodness and the actions in the mode of goodness, and has become very unwavering. A devotee is very enthusiastic in service, is willing to perform anything, is willing to preach if one person has come or 1,000 persons has come, is equally enthusiastic to share the knowledge of Krishna. That's just an example. And so do anything as an opportunity to please Krishna, not worried about the results. And so Krishna says here, with great determination and enthusiasm. That is an indicator of the mode of goodness, a very important indicator. And when one is detached from the fruits, this becomes more easy, and it's a very liberating consciousness because I don't have to worry about that which is not mine, the results of the work. Too often we worry about the results. So one unwavering is difficult if I'm focused on the results, but it becomes very easy if I'm focused on just pleasing Krishna through my service. And thus I'm willing to tolerate all kinds of difficulties. Okay. 27. The worker who is attached to work and the fruits of work, desiring to enjoy these fruits, who is greedy, always envious, impure, and moved by joy and sorrow, is said to be in the mode of passion. So this describes the worker in the mode of passion, attached to work, full of ups and downs, very volatile emotions, gets very animated and very disturbed, is only concerned about sense gratification, even willing to compromise morals, right? Being impure, Krishna says. And so this is what happens when one only has knowledge in the mode of passion, performs work in the action, work in the mode of passion, and thus this describes the person in the mode of passion. Finally, the worker who is always engaged in work against the injunction of the scripture, who is materialistic, obstinate, cheating, and expert in insulting others, who is lazy, always morose, procrastinating, is said to be a worker in the mode of ignorance. So, not a very favorable description, but this is very accurate. One who procrastinates all the time, that is a mode of ignorance. One who is completely, again, against Shastra, who is always lazy, morose, cheating, materialistic, obstinate. All these things describe one working in the mode of ignorance. And so, again, Krishna's goal here in describing the 5 constituents of action, helping us understand our role in action, and ultimately understanding the super soul's role is to get us to detach from the fruits, purify from those activities, so that one can take to the process of pure devotional service. And understanding this in the different modes can help us get to the mode of goodness, but ultimately transcend the modes to the higher platform. And thus, again, as a reminder, we spoke even in the modes of goodness, which sounded like devotional service. Prabhupada is speaking about devotional service pleasing Krishna, because ultimately that is going to be Krishna's final conclusion for all of us. So that is why it's a little bit intermixed, but it is for helping us to get to the ultimate conclusion. So this is the first part of chapter 18. Next week we'll discuss the second part, and the following week the final conclusion of this most glorious Bhagavad Gita. So thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda ki. Any comments or questions? I know we covered a lot of material today, so any discussion today?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Dhanavad pranams. Thank you always for such a wonderful class. Thank you so much, Prabhu. So I guess the last comment that you just made kind of relates to my question, and I guess stop me if maybe I'm jumping ahead, but we've learned so much detail about the modes of nature, and that even in the mode of goodness is binding. You have to come back to still get the result. So if I just use one of these for example, let's say knowledge. So to see that everyone is spirit soul, this is knowledge in the mode of goodness, but this doesn't transcend the mode. This is just still in the mode of goodness. So it's transcending the mode, using the mode of goodness as the springboard of the platform, then to bring it, to bhakti. Take this, okay, I now I see everyone is spirit soul, but now I see that everyone is, a part and parcel of Krishna. So how do I serve them? How do I turn the mode of goodness into bhakti? Is that the ultimate goal then?
Perfect. You've articulated it perfectly. The mode of goodness is a springboard. Prabhupada used the example of a runway. It's the launching point to transcend, to come to devotional service. Because devotional service is in Shuddha Sattva, pure goodness. Sattva going, mode of goodness, it's still tinged with passion and ignorance. So when one comes to pure goodness, that is a realm of devotional service. and thus there are no binding reactions, as you very nicely said, because even activities in the mode of goodness has some binding reactions. So we want to avoid those at all costs, but for the ability to come to the mode of devotional service. So, goodness is better than passion. Passion is better than ignorance. But ultimately, Krishna is going to say, do devotional service. And that is the key. And so that's why Prabhupada keeps referring to devotional service in these purports, because that's where we're going to want to get to. And what we often confuse is goodness with devotional service. And so we should draw a very clear distinction that when the objective is Krishna, to please Krishna, it is beyond the modes. Because the modes is in the material nature. So just knowing I'm spirit soul isn't yet bhakti. I need to know that the spirit soul's constitutional position is to please Krishna. Then it's bhakti. Yeah, you have
So,
it. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Yep.
So by lingering just in the mode of goodness, not being pure goodness, then we have the chance to basically still be intermingled with passion and ignorance, and we can kind of fall down and go to this loop of the gunas. But then if we transcend them by bringing it to bhakti and rising to pure goodness, then you're transcending the modes.
Exactly. And that's what Prabhupada says, is that coming to the mode of goodness, it's still dangerous because you'll ultimately likely be tempted to fall back down to the lower modes. But even in the mode of goodness, he compares it to making an A-class jail cell. You still have birth and death, old age and disease. Yes, you may be enjoying in the heavenly planets and opulence, but there still will be envy and pride and illusion. These impurities still exist, so it's very temporary. And once you consume those goodness credits, you have to come back down. So it's all leads to a temporary outcome. I would say temporary and limited. The bliss of bhakti far, far, far surpasses the bliss of the mode of goodness. And it's common sense. The bliss of free life pales in comparison to the bliss of an A-class jail cell. And that's the very vivid example that Prabhupada says. Nobody with any intelligence thinks the ultimate goal of life is to just get the best jail cell. They know the ultimate goal of life is to get free from the prison. And that's devotional service.
Hare Krishna. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Dandavats.
I have joined your class, Prabhuji. Very nectarious, smooth, very pleasing. While hearing, very pleasing, and mind is not getting distracted. Hare Krishna. So my question is related to. Maybe I have a question, but I might not put in right place. Sorry if I don't.
No problem.
The question is related to if a person is doing in the work in the mode of goodness as a matter of duty. So as per the chapter 5 factors, he is not attached to the body, not attached to the performance of the senses, and not even attached to he has he's just doing as a act of duty. So when all the other 4 factors become silent, absent, then that person is driven by the super soul completely.
Well, it's when one is ultimately fully driven by the super soul, they are in the realm of devotional service, right? So in the mode of goodness, they have faith, they have knowledge of Shastra, right? They know that the scriptures say one should perform this type of sacrifice, this type of charity, this type of austerity, and they understand it to be beneficial. And so they perform it, and they take inspiration, yes, from the super soul, who then inspires them to that action. But when a living entity is fully surrendered to the jurisdiction of the super soul, as Arjuna will become fully surrendered to the jurisdiction of Krishna, then it becomes devotional service, because the super soul's intent, the goal, is to bring one back to their original state of consciousness, which is devotional service. So our original state of consciousness is not even the mode of goodness. That is, again, a manifestation of the conditioned material world. It's not complete surrender to super soul. But what we understand is that, again, in a mode of goodness, one is not, one is surrendering their own desires with the faith in a higher authority. That's the distinction. No.
For example, is Shirdi Sai Baba, Satya Sai Baba. I'm just giving example. So these are the prominent acharyas or kind of spiritual masters. So now people who surrender unto them, they actually surrender to them because they are not, as said here in this, they are not worried about their bodily comfort, and they do not have any attachment to the performance. The people who are surrendering them, and they are not worried about the sense gratification, and they do not have any endeavor apart from serving them. So in that case, how do those great souls handle the karma result of these people and the devotees of them, and how do they deliver?
Well, without getting into specific personalities, remember the person in worship that we surrender to must be authorized, right? You can fully surrender and worship to a movie star, or to a politician, or to a spiritualist. But in order for it to have the potent result, one must be connected in Guru Parampara. And so,
Guru Parampara might not be ours, but they have connected with some bona fide Guru Parampara.
yeah, so as long as someone is connected to a bona fide Guru Parampara, the Guru receives the reactions of that work and passes it on to their Guru, and then passes on to their Guru, and passes on to their Guru, ultimately to Krishna, because that all bona fide Guru Paramparas are connected directly to the Supreme Lord. So thus they are able to deliver the conditioned soul with that action. But most of the prominent gurus in the world that we see today are not connected to a bona fide parampara. That is a problem. They're self-declared guru, and most of them are full impersonalists who are cheating the public with a bogus philosophy, with a bogus concept. Prabhupada writes in Srimad Bhagavatam so much about, this idea that, in 6 months of yogic practice you can become God. Or you achieve the, impersonal Brahman and become one with God. All this stuff, it's mostly, unfortunately, in the age of Kali Yuga, it's all unbonafide. And so the result of that worship is disaster, and the result for the worshipped, the person who is propagating this knowledge, is disaster. Just like we saw in Shirashopanishad. Ignorance is better than one who proclaims to have knowledge and thus leads others to a hellish condition as well. At least the ignorant only leads themselves to a hellish condition, while one who purports to have knowledge and then others follow not only takes himself down but takes others with him, and that is worse. And we saw that in Shirashopanishad. So that is the danger that is prevalent today, which is this falsehood that exists. And so one must get connected to a bona fide parampara. Then one can have success in their endeavors to transcend the modes. But unfortunately,
Regarding the connection to the 16 to 14, so here we are saying that if one is not not considering these five elements, five factors, including the super soul, that means he is foolish.
Yes.
Yeah, in that sense, the parampara who teaches the super soul and the soul are same, oneness. So their philosophy is not accepted here as to
How it can be accepted by anybody? How one can suggest that I don't even know what's happening in the room next door, have the same awareness, knowledge, knower that the super soul has. Super soul knows everything that's happening in every corner of the creation. I don't even know what's happening in my left toe right now. But I'm claiming soul and super soul are the same? That is most foolish and ridiculous. It passes no logic. It is not just Krishna's opinion. It is a fact. Soul and super soul are not one. They can never be one. So of course, anyone who subscribes to that logic is foolish. They are being fooled. And that's what, Krishna establishes. One must understand the supremacy. Krishna said in the 13th chapter, right? One must know that the super soul and soul, the soul is subordinate to me, he says. Subordinate to the super soul. Nitya Nityananam Chaitanas Chaitananam Eko Bahunam. They are of all eternals. There's still one who is maintaining all others. Yes, soul and super soul are both eternal, but there is still the supreme eternal. So in so much regard, basic common sense, Shastric evidence, what Krishna says, it all leads to the same conclusion. So the only reason one purports soul and super soul is one is for some selfish motive, some unscrupulous motive, out of false ego, envy, pride, to try to become God. And it is most foolish and disastrous. And that is why Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, one should not hear even a moment of this philosophy. Because what happens? It completely spoils one's devotional service. It's not good for you, he doesn't say. He said it completely destroys one's bhakti. It's totally disturbing. And it's completely unjust. So, and that's why Prabhupada writes so much about it.
earlier in the Bhagavad Gita it is true that there is nothing like oneness. There is always a soul, there is a super soul. I don't know how this sampradaya will survive.
Because people are not taking to the process to understand and apply common basic logic and common sense, and then study Shastra. Just read what Krishna says. Read what's in. It's black and white, clear as day. And by the mercy of Prabhupada, he is making this more and more available, and that is our responsibility to try to carry this message forward, and help others also not become bewildered by this very important fact. Hare, thank you. Anything else?
Yeah, Prabhuji, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Yeah, so much has been covered, Prabhuji. I don't know. I had quite a few questions. I don't know where they go. So anyway, one part which I kind of really still get confused is this impetus you said, right? For that person's action comes from the super soul. Now, in the mode of goodness also, the impetus to it, finally you said that be directed towards Krishna and doing the devotional service. Now, if we are giving this importance to the impetus, I thought all these are desire, right? That is the impetus towards the action, and then it has to be sanctioned by Krishna. Now, if we are saying about the impetus, then where does the impetus then, when a person is working in the mode of ignorance or passion, then the impetus again should be the super soul there also? Then should I understand understand in that flow that the impetus is from the super soul in that case. But then again, I remember that verse that we have, that if we want to forget Krishna, then Krishna will give us a devotion to forget him. If we want to remember Krishna, then Krishna will help us remember him. So should I understand that in that context?
Yeah, and it's a nice clarifying question because it's a little bit tricky. So, as you were suggesting in the question, the super soul is the impetus for all. One cannot survive without the impetus of the super soul, right? So, for the mode of, frankly, in the mode of pure goodness, Shuddha Sattva, Sattva Gun, Raja Gun, and Tama Gun. So, pure goodness, passion, and ignorance for all. The super soul is the impetus for action. But the impetus comes based on the desire of the individual. So responding to the desire, the super soul inspires certain types of activities. Right? So it is based on, so we're not being forced as a robot to work in a certain way, but we're all dependent on that super soul because we don't even know how to act to fulfill that desire. That knowledge comes from Krishna. So the super soul is acting in all regards. In the mode of goodness, one understands the constituents that there is a super soul, whereas in the other, they do not. So that is only distinction. Just as like a child may not know that gravity is keeping him bound to this earth, whereas the adult does. But in both cases, gravity is working. So it's the same as whether we know it or not, but the super soul is inspiring in all circumstances.
Okay, so basically you're saying that mode of goodness, Prabhuji, that's a place where we are aware that what is the impetus, that we what is our desire, or we have all that knowledge.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes.
One sees things as they are. One sees it as they are. Correct.
But then sometimes it is even worse when you have the knowledge and one does something otherwise. Right?
Yes. Yes. That is. We saw that in the mode of passion and ignorance, right? When one knows but still doesn't do it. Yep. It is worse.
So then when we say everything is guided by knowledge, now if one has theoretical knowledge, that is again just a waste, right? So then still a person would be categorized to be in the mode of ignorance or passion only, despite the fact the person has theoretical knowledge. I'm just trying to understand that. So practical knowledge is the knowledge which we always talk about here. It's not the knowledge per se.
Yeah, it's practical knowledge, but it's also our unencumbered knowledge, because sometimes our lust overcomes our knowledge. I know I shouldn't, take this intoxication. I know I shouldn't have this illicit relationship. I know I shouldn't slit the throat of this animal, but I still do it. Why? Because of my lust. So, it overcomes our intelligence, right? And that's why Krishna said lust resides in the senses, mind, and intelligence. And one must, shut off the senses from the material desires and strengthen the intelligence. And by that method, double effort, one can override this all-devouring enemy. And that's why it's an enemy. Because I may even know this is bad for me and I still do it. I always give the example of, it says right on the pack of cigarettes, this will kill you. This will kill you. But people do it. You kill millions of brain cells every time you take alcohol. People still do it. You're going to lose your financial security by gambling. People still do it. So all these things, there's knowledge is bad for you. So the knowledge alone, it must be really strong. When the knowledge becomes strong, then it can overcome the mind's flickering ideas.
And last, I just want a clarification about that marriage ceremony. So basically, the marriage ceremony, what you were saying was, is a way of purification because one mind is not strong enough to overcome those sensual desires. So therefore, it avoids the sinful reactions. So therefore, in that sense, it is purifying.
Yeah. A desire, a sensual desire that exists, and it's considered like bringing, a stick of butter with fire. When you bring a stick of butter to fire, the butter melts and it spills. But if you put the stick of butter in a pot and then bring it to fire, it's contained within the pot. Marriage is considered like that pot. It keeps the desire sort of, again, contained within an injunction, and there is, a positive spiritual injunction to have sense desire activities for the for the purpose of bringing Krishna conscious children to the world. So marriage is a form of austerity as well, because one is agreeing to restrict those desires within the confines of marriage. So just as that pot restricts the flow of butter under the heat, marriage is like that. That's how Prabhupada used to give the example. So, okay?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Anything else? Okay. So if not, next week we'll discuss the second section of chapter 18. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki. Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda ki. Hare Krishna.